The 2017 and 2018 Warriors were virtually unstoppable. They had 2 top 5 players with Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, as well as a Defensive Player of the Year in Draymond Green, and one of the greatest shooters of all time in Klay Thompson, surrounded by a really solid supporting cast. They were basically presumed to win the finals both seasons, which they did end up doing. Over these 2 seasons, the Dubs had a playoff record of 32-6, an absurd 84% winning percentage in the playoffs. In my opinion, they were the greatest team ever assembled, but there was one team that gave them a run for their money in this era. That team were the 2018 Houston Rockets. They were led by one of the best backcourts of all time in James Harden and Chris Paul, and the Rockets are one of few teams that truly gave them some sort of challenge. They went 3-3 with them in their regular season matchups over these 2 years, and were responsible for half of Golden State's playoff losses. And in the 2018 Western Conference Finals, they nearly did the impossible. Let's talk about it. In the 2014-15 season, the Houston Rockets had their best year since 1997. They won 56 games, got the 2 seed, and made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals, overcoming a 3-1 deficit against the Clippers in the second round on the way there. They were led by James Harden, who had the best season of his career, averaging 27.4 points per game, and Dwight Howard, who was in his second season with the squad. It was a super promising year for the franchise, but they would soon run into a sleeping giant in the Western Conference Finals, the Golden State Warriors. This was the year the Dubs really burst onto the scene, led by Steph, who had just won his first MVP. The Rockets were good, but they weren't good enough, losing the series in 5 games. But Houston did keep it close at times, losing the first 2 games of the series by a combined just 5 points. Heading into the 2015-16 season, the Rockets were in a pretty good spot, but the year was a disaster. There was drama involving Dwight wanting a bigger role and potentially being on the trade block. Coach Kevin McHale was fired partway through the season, being replaced by JB Bickerstaff, and the Rockets would finish just 41-41. They would once again run into the Warriors in the playoffs, making it as the 8th seed, who were coming off the greatest regular season of all time. They would get knocked out in 5 games, losing by an average of 24 points in their L's, and the one bright spot on the year was James Harden, who continued to ascend, averaging 29 points per game on the season. But it was clear he desperately needed some help. Dwight Howard wasn't going to be the second option to get them over the hump. The Rockets did bring in some talent following this year, adding Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson in the offseason, as well as dealing for Lou Williams, but they would lose Dwight and the additions weren't enough. The Rockets would win 55 games, finishing 3rd in the West, beating OKC in the first round, but ultimately would fall to the San Antonio Spurs in 6 games in round 2. This was despite Harden taking another step, averaging 29.1 points per game, a league-leading 11.2 assists, and finishing 2nd in MVP voting. Harden needed a second option. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Clippers across the West were hitting a wall. They bowed out in the first round of the playoffs to Gordon Hayward's Utah Jazz in 7 games, with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin as impending free agents. They were both getting older, and rumors were coming out that the Clippers didn't want to commit a ton of money to an aging core. Change was clearly coming for them, and this change would open the door for Houston. The move happened on June 28, 2017. The Los Angeles Clippers traded Chris Paul to the Houston Rockets in a sign-in trade, which sent Patrick Beverley, Sam Decker, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, Darren Hilliard, DeAndre Liggins, Kyle Wiltjer, and a first-round pick to the Clippers. It was a massive move that signaled the end of an era in Los Angeles. It was time to begin a rebuild. Over in Houston, though, it was finally time to truly contend. They added on to the team further by bringing in Gerald Green, PJ Tucker, and Luke Mbamute. The Rockets were suddenly a legit threat in the West, led by one of the greatest backcourts of all time. But there were some questions. Could Chris Paul and James Harden coexist with their ball-dominant playstyles? How would Coach Mike D'Antoni fare in his first season with the franchise? And most importantly, were they good enough to challenge the juggernaut Golden State Warriors, who had just won a title while only losing 1 game in the playoffs, tying an NBA record? GM Daryl Morey thought so, because after the trade he said, "We felt like with James Harden in his prime and Chris Paul in his prime, this gives us a real shot to chase the juggernaut teams that are out there. This puts us right there with them." Luckily for him and the Houston Rockets, they'd have a chance to prove that on opening night against none other than the Golden State Warriors. This first game would quickly set the tone for the Rockets' season strategy, which was shoot as many threes as possible. The season prior, the Rockets led the league in three-point attempts a game with 40.1, 7.2 more threes than any other team attempted. It was a tactic that many were critical of, and some thought they might lean a bit away from it this season, but instead they did the exact opposite and fully committed to the mantra of live by the three, die by the three. In the opener versus the Warriors, the Rockets would put up 41 3-point attempts, 11 more than the Dubs, but the Warriors gave the Rockets a lot of problems, leading by as much as 16 points in the third quarter. However, the Rockets clamped up in the fourth, outscoring the Dubs 34-20 and grabbing several critical offensive boards, leading them to a 1-point win, 122 to 121. The most impressive fact was that they had just won this game with Chris Paul putting up 4 points on 2 of 9 shooting. Harden had 27 and 11 to lead the team, but Gordon and Tucker each added 20, with Luke Mbah-a-Moute pitching in 14. It was clear that this team was well-rounded and was not just going to compete with the juggernauts, but that it was one of them. While this win had the Rockets riding high, it also came at a cost. Chris Paul sat during crunch time due to a hurt knee, which was really bothering him, and this injury would keep him out of Houston's 14 next games. Terrible news for a team trying to get off to a hot start. However, they didn't miss a beat. The Rockets would go 10-4 over this stretch, with 7 of those wins coming by double digits. James Harden put the team on his back, averaging 31 points per game and 10.2 assists over this stretch, including a 56-point bomb against Utah. Eric Gordon also stepped up in Chris Paul's absence, averaging 22 points per game. CP3 would return on November 16th, with the Rockets sitting at a pretty good record of 11-4, and to make it better, they wouldn't lose again until over a month later. The Rockets would go on a 14-game win streak, putting them at 25-4 on the season. But they weren't just beating teams, they were blowing everyone out. Over this stretch, the Rockets were winning games by an average of 16.5 points and shooting 40% from 3 on 41.9 attempts a game. They had 6 games where they dropped 120 or more points, including a 142-point bomb in Chris Paul's return versus Phoenix. They'd cool off for a bit after this, going just 9-9 over their next 18 games, including a rematch against Golden State, which Houston would lose despite KD being out. But that's when they stopped messing around. On January 28th, the Rockets were sitting second in the Western Conference at 35-13. They're only a few games behind Golden State, but San Antonio, Minnesota, and OKC weren't too far behind them. If they kept playing the 500 record basketball they'd been playing over the last month or so, they were going to start to fall in the standings. So they decided, let's just have one of the most dominant stretches in NBA history. If you thought their 14-game win streak earlier in the year was impressive, try a 17-game win streak over this next month, which led them to ascend to the first seed in the Western Conference. They beat teams by an average of 12.5 points, while James Harden and Chris Paul would truly begin to click as a duo. Over this stretch, Harden averaged 30.8 points per game, 6.2 rebounds, 8.4 assists, and 2.2 steals, while shooting 45.8, 35.2, and 87.2 splits, a stretch where he really began to separate from the competition as the MVP favorite. Chris Paul, meanwhile, would add 17.6 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, 7 assists, 1.6 steals on 47, 33.7, 92.5 splits, while playing high-level defense. These two, alongside the great play of Houston's role players, including a breakout year from center Clint Capella, were tearing the league apart. The streak would end on March 9th, 2018, when the Rockets fell 105-108 to the Eastern Conference leading Toronto Raptors. Harden missed a 3 at the buzzer to send the game to OT, dropping Houston to just 51-14, which is an absurd record. But they were still just half a game ahead of Golden State in the standings. So they decided to once again go on a double-digit win streak, winning 11 straight games from March 11th to March 30th. This stretch wasn't as dominant in terms of beating teams by 15 every night, but it was once again a showcase of Houston's firepower. Harden would struggle a bit and miss a couple games, but Chris Paul really thrived during this stretch, putting up 18.1, 6, and 7.7 in these 11 wins. This streak was the one that finally secured the 1 seed for Houston and concluded one of the most dominant displays of basketball we've ever seen. From January 28th to March 30th, the Rockets lost 1 game while winning 28, a feat that's only been done a few times in league history. They'd finished the season 3-3 after this stretch, giving them a record of 65-17 on the year, a new franchise record. Meanwhile, James Harden would deservingly be awarded with the MVP, averaging 30.4, 5.4, 8.8, and 1.8 on 44.9, 36.7, 85.8 splits. It was a wildly successful regular season for the franchise that immediately justified their acquisition of Chris Paul, validated their hiring of Mike D'Antoni, and silenced a lot of doubters. But the playoffs and a potential 3rd straight series against Golden State loomed ahead. The first 2 rounds of the playoffs were pretty inconsequential for Houston. In round 1, they faced off against the Minnesota Timberwolves, who had made the playoffs for the first time in over a decade. following their acquisition of Jimmy Butler. Harden and CP3 averaged a combined 48 points per game on the series, Clint Capella averaged a 15.8 and 14.8 double-double, and the Timberwolves were quickly eliminated in 5 games, 3 of which were double-digit wins by Houston. Round 2 was more of the same. The Rockets faced off against the upstart Utah Jazz, who had knocked off OKC and were led by a rookie Donovan Mitchell. Utah took a game, but Houston blew them out the other 4, as Harden dropped 28, 5.2, 7.4 a game, while Chris Paul popped off with 24.6, 7, and 6.2 a game. Clint Capella averaged another double-double, Eric Gordon and PJ Tucker each contributed about 12 points, and the Rockets were in peak form heading into the conference finals, having just lost 2 games on their way there. There, though, they would face off against none other than the Golden State Warriors. Golden State's path to the Western Conference Finals was similar to Houston's. They started off facing the Spurs in round 1, losing just 1 game while dominating the rest, even though Steph didn't play in the series. Curry would return during the second round against the Pelicans, and he didn't miss a beat. They dominated New Orleans with KD, Curry, and Klay, combining for 72.1 points per game, while Draymond averaged a 14.8, 11.8, 10, 2.4, 1.6 triple-double, and a 5-game gentleman's sweep. This victory set up the matchup everyone had been waiting for. Out east, LeBron had carried a mediocre Cavs squad to the Eastern Conference Finals, where he was facing off against the young upstart Celtics, led by rookie Jason Tatum and sophomore Jaylen Brown. The series was going to be fun, but neither of those teams seemed to stand a chance against these 2 Western Conference powerhouses. The Western Conference Finals felt like the true NBA Finals, and it would live up to the hype. In Game 1, the Rockets' dynamic backcourt came to play. Harden dropped 41, 4, and 7 on 58% shooting, and Chris Paul contributed 23, 11, and 3 on 47.1% shooting. However, they didn't have help. Clint Capella and Eric Gordon would combine for 27, but the rest of the team shot just 5 for 22, as the Warriors took Game 1 119 to 106. KD dropped 37, Klay had 28, and Steph had 18. If these 3 were going to play like this, Houston didn't have much of a shot. Houston flipped the script in Game 2, though, winning by 22 points. Harden and CP3 both showed up again, but this time they had some support, with Tucker putting up 22 on 8 of 9 shooting, Ariza having 19 on 7 of 9 shooting, and Eric Gordon totaling 6 threes for 27 points. This was the Rockets team that had to show up to do the impossible. If they weren't going to play like this, they weren't going to win this series. But they'd once again go missing in Game 3. Harden had 20, but no other Rocket had more than 13, as Golden State won by a ridiculous 41 points. Down 2-1, Game 5 was a must-win for Houston, and it was a classic. The Rockets started cold with only James Harden scoring more than 5 points in the first quarter, while KD started on fire with 10 points. In the second quarter, Chris Paul and Harden struck back, combining for 29 to give Houston a 7-point lead heading into halftime. That's when the third quarter dub showed up. Steph dropped 17 on the quarter, single-handedly equaling the Rockets in the frame, putting them down 10 heading into the last 12 minutes. In the fourth quarter, Chris Paul put up just 8 points and Harden had just 2, a scenario that would result in a Houston L about 99% of the time, but they clamped up. The Warriors shot just 3 for 18 in the fourth, with KD and Curry combining for 2 of 13 shooting at home at Oracle. Klay Thompson would airball a mid-range jumper with a few seconds to go, CP3 would hit a free throw on the other end, and the Dubs couldn't get a shot off in the final half a second. Suddenly, the series was tied, marking the first time in the KD era that any team had taken 2 games from the Dubs. Heading back to Houston for Game 5, the Rockets had a golden opportunity, one that they took advantage of. Game 5 was an ugly back-and-forth battle. Harden shot just 23.8% for 19 points, with 6 turnovers, and Chris Paul had 27 and 6, but shot just 6 for 19. Meanwhile, the Dubs' big 3 each had over 20 points, while Draymond had a double-double. But, due to some timely buckets from Eric Gordon, the Rockets were up 1 with just a minute to go. Then, disaster struck. With 51 seconds left in the game, Chris Paul took Quinn Cook off the dribble and shot a fading jumper. As he came down, he immediately grabbed his hamstring. The Warriors missed a 3 on the other end, and after a missed shot by Harden was tipped out of bounds by the Warriors, Chris Paul checked out of the game. The Rockets held on though, taking a 3-2 lead in the series, the first time any team had led over the Warriors in a series during the last 2 playoffs. Houston was just 1 win away from the finals, but it would soon be announced that Chris Paul, who had been critical to Houston's last 2 wins, would miss Game 6 of the series with a strained hamstring. The Rockets forged on, but without CP3 at Oracle, they stood no chance in Game 6. The Dubs would win by 29 points. Houston hung around for a while, heading into halftime with a 10-point lead actually, but Golden State would outscore them 64-25 over the last 24 minutes. The series was going to a Game 7. The Rockets would soon receive another blow though, as Chris Paul was listed out for the critical final game. Suddenly, James Harden was the lone star again, facing off against maybe the most talented team of all time. But the game was in Houston, and the Rockets had managed to hang on for half of last game. All they needed were some threes to fall. Game 7 started eerily similar to Game 6. Houston stormed out to an early lead, winning by 5 at the end of the first, thanks to 14 points from the MVP himself, James Harden, and 4 threes by the squad as a whole. In the second quarter, Gerald Green and Eric Gordon hit back-to-back threes to give Houston a 42-28 lead. It was looking like Houston had a shot to pull this thing off. Then, with 6:13 left in the quarter and the Rockets up 12, James Harden missed a 3. Now, this would normally be no big deal, as the Rockets were a team that shot from behind the arc in volume. Misses were expected, but this missed 3 by Harden would start one of the most unlucky stretches in basketball history, perhaps the most. Houston's mantra was live by the 3, die by the 3, and well, it was time to die by the 3. Harden misses a 3. Eric Gordon misses a 3. Eric Gordon misses another 3. Harden misses a 3. Harden misses a 3. PJ Tucker misses a 3. Harden misses 2 straight 3s. Harden starts the third with a missed 3. Ariza bricks a 3. Eric Gordon gets a 3 blocked by Durant. Harden misses a 3. PJ Tucker misses a 3. Eric Gordon misses a 3. Trevor Ariza misses a 3. Ariza bricks another 3. Gerald Green misses a 3. Trevor Ariza misses a 3. Eric Gordon misses a 3. Trevor Ariza bricks another 3. Harden adds a brick. Joe Johnson, who is on this team somehow, misses a 3. Eric Gordon misses 1. Ariza, you guessed it, bricks a 3. Eric Gordon misses a 3. James Harden misses a 3. And finally, PJ Tucker hits a 3-point shot. 27 straight missed 3s. A 24-minute 3-less stretch in a must-win game by a team that shot 36.2% from 3 on the season on a league-leading over 43-point attempts a game. The Rockets in Game 7 shot 7 of 44 from deep, or 15.9%. PJ Tucker shot 2 of 5, Eric Gordon shot 2 for 12, Harden shot 2 for 13, Trevor Ariza shot 0 for 9, Gerald Green shot 1 for 4, and Joe Johnson, who once again somehow ended up on this team, shot 0 for 1. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. It was perhaps the coldest the team had ever gone from deep, and the fact that it was this Houston team almost feels like a script. The team that had committed to 3-point shooting unlike any squad before them. Obviously, this cost the Rockets the game, losing 101-92 and just barely failing to defeat the Warriors, who would go on to sweep the Cavaliers in the finals. If the Rockets had shot just 25% from deep, they would have won. All they needed were 4 of those 27 misses to go down, and they'd be in the NBA Finals, with a great shot to win it if Chris Paul was able to return. Between CP's 3 injury and this historically terrible shooting performance, it truly felt like Houston was being punished by the basketball gods. For what? I don't know, but I don't know how else to explain what happened. It's almost impossible to do so. Houston would run it back the following year and push the Warriors to 6 games in the second round, with KD missing Game 6, but they would end up losing. Following that run, the Rockets would trade Chris Paul to the Thunder for Russell Westbrook. They would once again advance to the second round, but again lose in the second round to the eventual champion Los Angeles Lakers. They'd trade Russ, Harden would demand a trade, eventually getting moved to the Nets, and that was it. The Rockets would never again reach the heights they did in 2018 during Harden's tenure with the franchise. Those Western Conference Finals will forever be looked at as one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. If Chris Paul doesn't get hurt, maybe the Rockets would have won it all, completely flipping everyone's perspective on CP3 and Harden's careers now that they'd have a ring together. If the Rockets hit just 4 out of 27 missed 3s, the same thing could have happened. KD would have just 1 ring and a Finals MVP from Golden State, and their era would probably be looked at as a massive failure, changing the legacy of him and everyone else on that team. But instead, Harden and CP3 remain ringless, and the Rockets remain without a championship since the days of Hakeem, all because of a hamstring and some 3s. And that's basketball. I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you do enjoy. If you notice that my setup's kind of weird, like the camera and lighting or anything, my webcam broke, so I'm dealing with what I've got right now. I'm recording on my phone. It might stay, it might change, we'll see, but I appreciate y'all sticking through it. Hope it wasn't too rough. Once again, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy, and comment down below what you remember about this Rockets team in this series, because it was genuinely one of the most shocking things I've ever seen. I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.